You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Inslee.
This episode of Foreign Policy Focus is going to be the first half of an interview that I did with Scott Horton. The interview is quite long, so I decided to break it up into 2 episodes. The second half of the interview will run on the next show. And here's the interview. This is episode 337 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. Returning to the show for the 5th time is Scott Horton. He is the editorial director of antiwar.com, the managing editor of the Libertarian Institute, the host of the Scott Horton Show, author of Fool's Errand. I even think you've been doing some writing recently at Breitbart, Scott. So you've been pretty busy here in 2019.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for mentioning the Breitbart stuff, because that gives me a chance really to highlight my co-author who's doing all the hard work, Robert Gaines, who's an Air Force veteran of the Afghan war. And so I'm cheating and essentially putting my name on his work. I'm participating, but he gets the lion's share of the credit there. And then, yes, absolutely, the strategy is attack the right from the right. The Breitbart crowd already hate these wars and are over these wars. I'm just trying to kind of help to, if I can, to try to solidify that opinion that this is what we think. We no longer believe in this stuff if we ever did over here on the populist right. And so as long as they'll have me, and actually, I never did get an answer back on my last piece, our last piece that I submitted there, but I think that might just be because their, foreign policy editor has been real busy with other things. And you know what I mean? Like it's process stuff. So right. Our next article is going to be published today or tomorrow or sometime very soon at the National Interest, but we've got 3 so far at Breitbart. And Robert Gaines is just great. He's such a great writer. And so, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. And you know, that's the kind of thing, too, for people in the audience who you're trying to get through to your right wing uncle. You tell them, look, man, here it is at Breitbart, where, you know, it's written essentially from a right point of view, certainly not a left point of view. I mean, we're both, I think, libertarians. I don't know a lot about Gaines's politics, but I think he's essentially one of us, you know, but it's written from an American, you know, patriotic, if not nationalist point of view there, you know, and fits right in. So I think that's really important that we carve out that space on the right, that people don't have to feel anymore like you're signing up with Michael Moore if you want to be anti-war, because wouldn't that dissuade you? Right?
No, it's great because if there's anything that could be remotely tied to anything like left-wing or Democrat on the website in general, then, you know, that right-wing person is just going to dismiss it. But when you write it at Breitbart and you write it how, you know, these articles are being written, you know, where there's not a trace of, you know, anything left-wing in it at all. You know what I mean? Then they have to just face the foreign policy issue and they could be convinced by it.
Yeah, I absolutely think so. And after all, I mean, because we really are right. So the reason I always say attack the left from the left and the right from the right, it's not a matter of manipulation. I mean, the first premise there is that we libertarians are better than the right on the things that they're good on, and we're better than the left on the things that they're good on. So we need to take our own position, right? Gold, money, private property rights, peace. These are right-wing as hell positions from our point of view. And you can't have free market capitalism and property rights and a limited government and a world empire simultaneously, can you? It has to be one or the other. So forget anything any liberal or left-winger ever said, except maybe to implicate them in, you know, waging these social engineering projects around the world, a bunch of Trotskyites with their grandiose plans. But if you really want to conserve what's best about our society, first thing you want to do is call off the perpetual war, which, by the way, that's what Jimmy Carter said to Donald Trump over the weekend. They talked on the phone. And Jimmy Carter told his Sunday school class that, yeah, I talked to Donald Trump and I told him, you know, the Chinese are getting way ahead of us. And the reason why is because we made peace with them back in the 70s. And we've been at war ever since then, and they haven't. And which is exactly speaking Donald Trump's language. As he put it in his State of the Union address, great nations don't fight perpetual wars, endless wars, because, of course, those wars will make them no longer great. Anyone can see that now, especially, you know.
Yeah, well, on fighting wars, Scott, we got the Libertarian Institute there and fighting the state, and there's a bunch of books coming out this year from the Libertarian Institute, and there's 2 that should be coming out real soon. So do you want to just let everybody know what those are?
Yeah. Well, so first of all, I hope that sometime by the end of the year, maybe sooner, we'll be putting out a book of Sheldon Richman's about why Palestine matters, based on his great series that he wrote for the Libertarian Institute over the last year. And I really want to get a move on with that as soon as we can. But very soon, like this week, maybe next week. But I'm waiting for very few things to happen before pushing the final button on publishing the late, great William Norman Grigg's last book. And, he died 2 years ago, April the 12th. And, but he left this great book behind that he edited himself, that his former protege and very good friend from the John Birch Society, Thomas R. Edlum, wrote a wonderful introduction for. It's just, man, it's so awesome. And then it's, it's essentially anti-police writings and anti-police state writings by Will from, it's from 2001 through 2013 or so. And it's called No Quarter, The Ravings of William Norman Grigg. And, it's got great cover art too. Scott Alberts is this great artist who did this great cartoon of Will, pounding away on his keyboard, fighting for what's right. And, everybody's going to really love it. It's such a devastating book too. It's just incredible. And everyone should know this because this is important. Certainly anybody who knows Will or knows about Will knows how important this is, that every dime of this goes straight to his family. The Libertarian Institute isn't making a penny off of this, nor would we ever want to. So, he did leave 6 children behind. And so, for what it's worth, it'll be worth, I don't know, a couple of $10,000 at least to them to get this book out too. And it's going to be, absolutely worth it, for the people to buy it. So I'm really excited about it. I can't wait to see the reaction. And I'll encourage people to interview. I'll do interviews about it. Any other hosts out there listening, but especially you should talk with Thomas R. Edlum, and maybe we'll do shows together promoting it and that kind of thing. But Tom Edlum was really Will's protege for years at the John Birch Society, and the stuff that he has to say in that introduction and that kind of thing are just great. I would only want to stay out of the way of that anyway. So, yeah. And then very soon after that, like another week or 2 or something, I'm putting out a book of transcripts of all of my interviews of Ron Paul, and it's 37 of them. And there's one interview of me by him and Dan McAdams on the Liberty Report, the second to last one. And then there's one more Ron after that. So it's, I'm not exactly sure, but I think right now the title is The Great Ron Paul, the Scott Horton Interviews 2004 through 2019. And it's awesome, man. I just finished my first read through of the whole thing after getting all the transcripts done. My first, editing pass through, and, it's really great. It's Ron Paul on everything, and of course ahead of the curve on everything, and all the wars and the economy and the financial crisis and everything. It's great, and so I'm really proud of that. I'm a little embarrassed because, in every single one of these interviews, I'm like, oh wow, Ron Paul, you're like Tony Hawk, you're my favorite. Oh my god, can't believe I'm meeting you in person again, and like, you know what I mean. So I sound like a real dork. In every single interview, 37 of them in a row, but I don't care, because what the hell, man, if that's something I got to be embarrassed about, that like all those chances I had to talk with the great Ron Paul, I told him how important and wonderful he was, that like, oh well, I can live with that. Believe me, there are a lot more embarrassing things about being me than that. So, oh well.
Yeah. And then you got your book coming out sometime before the end of the year too, right?
That's right. Well, I can go ahead and tell you, man. Nobody ripped me off to steal this from me. I need to hurry up and copyright it. It'll be called Enough Already. Time to End the War on Terrorism.
Oh, that's awesome. That's a great title.
And it's about Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Iraq War II, Iraq War III, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Burkina Faso, and fucking everything. It's all in there.
All right.
So,
Well,
and you were there. You saw the presentation I did that was based off of the outline that I wrote up for this book back a couple of years ago. And then, the great Joanne, the Australian, wrote up the transcript of the entire 5-hour jam. And so now my job is editing the hell out of that. And of course, I'm reading a ton of books, and I've even got a great research assistant helping me reading books and taking notes. I've got you and all the great guys in the Reddit group who are going back, listening to old interviews and taking notes for me to go back and mine. And so, I really am between a rock and a hard place and trying to be brief enough. I mean, if I'm going to tell you about 10 wars, I better take it easy on you on each one, or right. Like, nobody's going to read this thing if it's just total overkill. On the other hand, me, I can't stand to leave anything unsaid either. So that's how chapter 2 became Fool's Errand, a book about Afghanistan 3 years ago. So, I'm going to have to figure out how to split the difference, but the rough draft is only, I think, like 225 pages or 250 pages. So I still got a little bit of wiggle room. So we'll see how it goes, but I'm going to try to get it out by Labor Day kind of thing, by the end of the summer, if at all possible. Once I can get some of this other stuff behind me, my computer, my server, and my whole internet network and everything here, being completely broken for a month certainly didn't help. I'm still trying to catch up on interviews and all that stuff, but one of these weeks I'm going to find time to really buckle down again and get back to work on the book and see what we can do here.
All right. Well, the last thing before we actually start talking about WikiLeaks here is you're coming up on 5,000 interviews, Scott. So, I mean, that's a real accomplishment. And if you look at, just some of the archives you have there, maybe the books you could turn into, like your interviews with Nasser Arabi or Ramzi Baroud, JD Cash. I mean, there's just so much great stuff there, and how you covered WikiLeaks all the way through. So, I don't know if you're looking at doing those projects in the future, but man, it seems like it'd just be great content for everyone.
Man, you're hired. You're already one of the most important parts of the Libertarian Institute anyway. No question about that. You want to help me get these books published? Let's work something out, Kyle.
All right, let's talk about it, Scott. But right here, I guess we should go ahead and do the interview and the episode, the show here with the WikiLeaks stuff, right? What I want to talk about, Scott, is because I really didn't, come to be good on this stuff until, I don't know, like 2012 or 2013. And so I missed a lot of the WikiLeaks stuff, and then I didn't understand the war. So, whatever Sean Hannity was saying at the time sounded about right enough to me. So I want, kind of bring you on today and help everybody, all of us 2012 Ron Paul libertarians really understand a lot better what, all these WikiLeaks meant, especially the Assange and Manning dumps who are, so, brutally persecuted right now by the Trump administration. Manning's back in jail. Assange is now in a UK jail. I mean, this is really seems like an awful thing. I don't know if you have anything just to say about the general situation with both of those two, being arrested right now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, first premise here. America is the world empire, and it's got no right to be. The U.S. government, that is, has no right to do what it does. Manning was not, exposing the government, its innocent employees for benevolent activities, but in ways that could compromise them and get them hurt or some kind of thing. What Manning exposed was war crimes, many of them, and war crimes that, and straight to the Assange angle too, and the WikiLeaks angle too. Then Bradley Manning, this Army, I think specialist or maybe even sergeant at the time, had these documents. They're not top secret documents. They don't expose sources and methods. If they did, those things would be top secret. These were secret level and confidential level cables from the military on the Iraq and Afghan wars and from the State Department, from the SIPR network, internal document network there. And Manning originally took this leak to the New York Times and to the Washington Post. And if you go back, you see that Manning was on leave and came to the United States and tried to communicate with the two biggest papers in the world, the two most important newspapers in America and in the world, and said, look, I have this stuff. And they wouldn't even answer. And so Manning said, all right, I'm taking this stuff to WikiLeaks then and to Julian Assange, and gave it to Julian Assange. And now the reason we know so much about this is because then Bradley Manning had confided in a hacker friend named Adrian Lamo. Well, Adrian Lamo, when he found out about what was going on here, had no obligation to do this as a journalist. In fact, Lamo told Manning, one, I'm a journalist, which you don't even have to be to invoke the First Amendment there on your sources. Today could be your very first day of considering journalisming, and that would be perfectly good enough under the American law. But Lamo said, hey, listen, one, I'm a journalist, and two, I'm an ordained minister. So I am not obligated to tell on you, which no one would be. And under American law, no one would be obligated to tell about knowing about someone else's felony. That's not the law. But Lamo did go straight to the FBI, and the FBI said, all right, get this guy. You have this guy on your hook. Let's reel him in and let's make it worse. Right. So one of the first things that Lamo did was say, hey, you know what you could do? You could make a lot of money selling this stuff to the Russians or the Chinese. And Manning said, what, are you kidding me? No, stupid. This isn't about that. I'm telling you, man, there's some real crimes in here. And I want the American people and the people of the world to know so that they can use their political democratic process to make reforms. I mean, we're talking stuff straight out of Thomas Jefferson's writings and you know, the justifications for the First Amendment in the first place. That the people will know the truth so that they can make things right. That's, you know, never mind your natural born freedom of speech, but that's the utilitarian purpose behind the civil right, the civil arrangement in our society. We are sovereign. The people are sovereign. We allow the government to exist, to be our security force within the law, period. And we have every right to know what they're doing and to hold them accountable. End of argument. Because this ain't England. We don't have a queen, and we are not anyone's subjects, supposedly, is the deal. So, anyway, so Manning had nothing but pure whistleblower motives. This is, you know, completely proven inside and out, up and down. No question about that. And then when they published this stuff, the stuff that came out, that first of all, when WikiLeaks published it, they worked with, and I'm forgetting now on the different cases, but essentially they worked with, I think even then the New York Times, or maybe the New York Times was left out. One of these, the New York Times was left out. I don't want to get this wrong for you, Kyle. I'm sorry. But overall, they worked with the Guardian, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and other major papers to publish these documents. Maybe it was the New York Times was excluded at this point. Anyway, but it was major papers that published the documents themselves and wrote story after story after story on what the documents showed. And, you know, these major papers won Pulitzer Prizes and stuff for some of this reporting. And so then, you know, Manning, I'll get to the substance of the leak in a second, but Manning was prosecuted for espionage, which you might have thought meant, you know, doing something like this on behalf of a foreign power, not journalism. But the law in America calls this espionage. And Manning was prosecuted, you know, court-martialed for this. But before that was held for, I think, more than 2 years. And for the vast majority of that time in solitary confinement, and then in the guise of suicide precautions, which were legitimate because Manning was suicidal, being held in solitary confinement for months on end, was being driven to suicide, or, you know, suicidal thoughts and situations and whatever. But then so to protect, you know, I guess at that point, it's still Bradley Manning, to protect him from hurting himself, they stripped him naked and then left him like that for months, just humiliated, you know, in front of the guards and this kind of thing, and just left him like that. And you know, solitary confinement itself is torture, you know, under at least international law and under any definition of common sense. And if you just read about how it's used in American prisons, I mean, imagine being locked in the space the size of a parking space or the size of a queen size or king size bed. And that's it. That's the whole thing. A small bathroom and just locked in there for 23 hours a day for months and months and months. This will drive the sanest man mad. And Manning already kind of had some problems. This is absolutely, abuse. If it's not illegal torture, it's, certainly criminal from a moral point of view. And especially for someone who at that time was simply accused and not convicted of anything. And
right. And I think a lot of these times they don't even allow the people to have like reading material in their cell. So you actually have nothing to do all day except, I guess, think about your impending trial. And I don't know how many years Chelsea Manning was facing, but that must have just been such torture to like have nothing to do all day but to worry about your coming trial and nowhere to go. And I think this most recent time, the solitary confinement, it was like from 1 to 3 a.m. was when she was allowed out of her cell. So it's such a joke of, claiming that it's administrative segregation and all this. But go on. Sorry.
Yeah. No. Well, and so, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. So to bring it to current time here, first of all, so Manning was convicted, had done it, and once was convicted, announced that she was now Chelsea Manning and all of that kind of thing. That was, the time that all that took place. And did 7 years total, convicted as sentenced to 35. And then at the end of his presidency, Obama did not pardon Chelsea Manning, but commuted the sentence. So during this time, of course, Assange is, accused on some pretty trumped up charges, seemingly, of sexual abuse of these women in Sweden. Both, and the charges ended up being dropped. They're trying to reinstate them now, but they actually never was even charges. It was like a reasonable suspicion, whatever they have in their threshold for the law for wanting him for questioning. Well, they could have questioned him in the UK, where he was living at the time. And it was clear, and this has all been journalism to death, that the Americans were intervening. The Swedes originally dismissed the charge or, dropped the whole thing, the investigation. And the Americans called and screamed at them. It's like, what the hell are you doing? You got a hook in Assange and you're letting him go? Reinstate the charges now or the accusations now. So Assange said, well, come and question me in England, which Swedish authorities do with suspects all the time. That's already a process. They already do that. But in this case, nope, you got to come to Sweden. When the whole thing is clearly a pretext for then they will help the Americans kidnap him and send him off to America to be tried for espionage and maybe, sentenced to death even. And so Assange said, well, forget that. And he had originally been arrested in the UK on the Swedish suspicion, which have you thing. So he dressed up in a disguise and hightailed it to the Ecuadorian embassy where he applied for asylum and got it from the leftist government that was in charge in Ecuador at the time. And so that was 7 years ago. And Assange has been, locked up essentially himself in solitary, although he has visitors. And it's a pretty nice apartment. If you have to be locked in solitary confinement, it's a nice cell, but don't pretend it's anything other than a cell. People act like, oh, it's some hotel room and he's just having a good old time up there. Well, he can't leave. Well, now he's in prison, but I'm talking about that whole time for 7 years. He couldn't go outside. Occasionally would go out on the balcony to give a statement or something, but I think he found cause to not do that anymore. He wasn't getting sunlight. There was a report I read by a doctor who had regularly visited him who said he was deteriorating severely, just like he would in real prison solitary confinement. The lack of sunlight, the lack of, good food and company and peace of mind and all of these things, was making him severely ill. He had dental problems that they wouldn't let him go and have, surgery, so he's sitting there suffering a massive toothache pain and all of this stuff. These are the Brits. This is, the Magna Carta, this and that, English liberties and this and that. And they're, whatever, man, tough for you. You can't come out to go to the dentist or we'll arrest you and haul you off to Guantanamo or God knows what. So he's in there. He stayed. And she also said, all of these accusations that he didn't wash and was, all this stuff. These are all just smears. None of that is true. She was the doctor who was examining him. And she was saying, which, by the way, even if that was true, like the worst, I saw on Reddit the other day, the smear that they claim that he was smearing, I used smear twice in a row like that, sorry, that he was smearing feces all over the walls and stuff. And of course, all the liberals in this thread anyway just buy it, just believe it because they want to. Lock, stock, and barrel, it must be true. That's what some anonymous source says to some English rag. Then, oh, we know that. Oh, no pictures, but yeah, anyway. But they claim that about him. And yet, but what would that prove if that was really true, other than that they had driven a sane man mad by imprisoning him essentially on bogus, without charges, for 7 years in solitary confinement? I mean, even if that was true, that's a measure of his innocence and their cruelty and nothing else, you know? But you're just supposed to go, oh, I hate that guy. Oh, man, I don't like his white hair. Oh, man, I don't like his imperious attitude. Oh, I don't like his whatever it is. He's the bad guy in your, you know, on your TV show that you're supposed to identify against. Because why? Because the CIA says so? Because the worst butchers on the planet say so? The worst liars on the planet Earth instruct you to hate him? So you do? And for what? For exposing them, for being criminals. Blood on his hands, blood on his hands. That's what they said about Manning and Assange. Blood on their hands, blood on their hands. And yet, what are we talking about here? We're talking about they were publishing documents about how the military and the State Department had blood on their hands. Yeah, they actually kill people. All Manning and Assange did was tell the truth about that, was show the truth about that. Yeah, and as Robert Gates was forced to admit, there was no evidence that anyone was killed because of that leak. And you know what? If there had been some names of some Afghan informants in there and then the Taliban got them, that would be a shame. But that still would not be enough to denounce the whole leak and say that the whole thing was not newsworthy, that the whole thing amounted to treason against the American people rather than the greatest thing anybody ever tried to do for us. That's the worst part of this, that real human beings, not government employees, but actual people, would allow the government to dictate their completely stupid attitude about this, that this is somehow against the interests of the American nation, for us to know the truth about what our government is doing wrong. And how in the world could people be convinced of that? And of course, it's just partisanship. At the time when this came out, it was in 2010, and it was the very beginning of the Obama years, and most of the leak implicated the Bush government. And so the right wing, and there was some stuff that was embarrassing to the Obama crew too, but most of it hit the Bush team. And so the right wingers were saying they ought to be taken out and shot. This is treason. Assange is guilty of treason, even though he's an Australian, not an American. You know, he has no allegiance to the U.S. state. What are you talking about? Treason. And even what Manning did was not treason. It was a leak for journalism purposes. Straight on the exact parallel with Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, or, you know, Karen Silkwood and the nuclear plant, or whatever you got, man. Purely along democratic, little d, democratic American whistleblower lines, exactly the way things are supposed to be. But the partisanship said that, no, this was the highest treason. And then, so now to bring it to so then real quick here, 2016, Assange comes out and leaks all this stuff supposedly provided to him by the Russians, although we do not know that at all. It is alleged in that indictment, but that indictment doesn't even pretend to describe the evidence supporting its assertions. It's simply a list of claims, which is good for nothing. Maybe it's true, but there's no evidence to support it. They haven't even attempted to provide any. But anyway, wherever he got them from, and there are other explanations floating around as well, but wherever he got them from, WikiLeaks published Hillary's emails, the DNC emails and the Podesta emails in, I guess not, they weren't really Hillary's emails, right? They were the DNC and the Podesta emails. It was Jason Leopold that was publishing Hillary's emails, other than the 30,000 that she deleted and erased that not even the Russians can find, apparently. And then these emails helped to ruin her reputation in the run up to the election, which I think it's worth pointing out every time, that even if you accept the fact that, or the assertion, I don't know the fact, if you accept the claim that the Russians were behind this, I think it's still a matter of supposition what their motive was. Why, Democrats, should it be that whoever published Hillary Clinton's emails would expect for those emails to do anything but prove what a wonderful and dedicated public servant that she is. That she was, quote unquote, the most qualified candidate for president ever. How come it just goes without saying that for someone to publish emails about the Democratic National Committee, about the chairman of her campaign, that those would automatically be a detriment, that they would implicate her, that they would implicate the DNC? And the answer is, of course, because she is a horrible, terrible criminal. She is a horrible, terrible Secretary of State, and she was a money-making foundation runner at the very same time, too, and taking donations in the tens of millions of dollars from the supporters of the Islamic State in the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia at the very same time that she's the Secretary of State, pretending to not know what's going on around here and all of this stuff. And so the way you hear that now is this was an attack, assuming, again, the premise that the Russians had done it. This was an attack. It was like Pearl Harbor. It was like 9/11. This is the Russians are trying to destroy our democracy and all these things. When, you know, even if you go with the premise that, come on, everybody knows any secret emails, any private communication at Hillary's is going to show what a terrible bastard she is. But still, you know, they shouldn't have done that or whatever, you know, that kind of thing. They might argue that. But I think if you're not a partisan, if you despise Hillary and Trump in equal measure or love them both the same or whatever, and you just look at it, it's just journalism. It's exactly what's supposed to be done. And who cares if the leak came from this, that, or the other foreign government? We have the right to know what's in those emails. We have the right to know about the DNC rigging the election against Hillary's competition. We have the right to know about her making corrupt deals with foreign states to pursue their foreign policies. And so, but, oh well, partisanship kicks in, and now Julian Assange is nothing but a Russian spy and a Russian agent and a Republican agent, and therefore an enemy of the American people, an enemy of all good journalists who would never do such a thing as publish so many documents at once and expose the government to such criticism. And this is, you know, I was complaining before about actual human beings, but what about the media people? What about all the, you know, and virtually 95% of American journalists and pundits are one click to the left of center Hillary Clinton liberal types. And they have virtually all forsaken Assange and Wikileaks, and for that matter, Manning. And these are the people who, again, they supported the leak back when it happened because it mostly hurt Bush, and they were liberals. But now that the Trump government is using the Manning leak against Assange, whatever, kill them all, let God sort them out is the point of view of the American liberal media. They don't care. You say that Manning is back in prison, back in solitary confinement, not convicted of anything, but simply in contempt of court for refusing to testify against Assange in front of this grand jury. Oh, well, whatever. They don't care. New York Times isn't running editorials saying let Manning out of that cage right now. And let's get serious about this, okay? Chelsea Manning is somewhat of a fragile personality and reportedly has tried to kill herself 2 different times, like legitimately, not just tweeted that I might or something, which is still pretty bad. People don't really threaten suicide unless they're really having a hard time, you know? That's not a joke, but they don't care about that. The court system doesn't care about that. The Department of Justice doesn't care about that. And, you know, all the liberal media stars on Twitter, they don't care about that. If Chelsea Manning kills herself under the pressure to testify against Julian Assange for engaging in acts of journalism, but they hate him. And the entire premise that, hey, I disagree with what you say, but I'll fight to the death for your right to say it, that free speech, free press, freedom of religion, you know, that these are the very core of what we all believe in, no matter what happens always, right? If the Yellowstone supervolcano goes off and obliterates half our civilization, I don't want to hear any BS about an emergency. We have freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of all these things. This has always been the American consensus, not just because it's natural rights, but because we all agree that these are rights. And they're going to let the essentially the CIA and the FBI and the DOJ and not the law, but the state take revenge against Julian Assange for doing his job, exposing their crimes and exposing the media for a bunch of handmaidens that they are. You know, we're going to be feeling the consequences of this for a long time. And you know what? I don't want to concede. They're like, oh, okay, he is a bad guy and you are supposed to dislike him, but still, I don't think so. I think Julian Assange is a worldwide hero. And there are a hell of a lot of people who think so too. There's so much good that has been done from the truth that has been exposed by that organization. He deserves every Pulitzer Prize that ought to be stripped away from the New York Times and the Washington Post. And these guys won Pulitzers over their Russia coverage. Over there, Russia, fix the election for Donald Trump. Insane truth or garbage. While they're laughing. And by the way, they won Pulitzers off of the Manning leak through WikiLeaks. And they either laugh or they turn their head as these people are now rotting in cells. It's disgusting. I hate America. I mean, not really, but I hate the way things are. I don't hate the country, the people, but the fact that we can have a genocide in Yemen and it's not even in the news. MSNBC didn't even mention it one time for a year solid, more than a year. It's like, 15 months or something, until finally Chris Hayes brought it up after the killing of Khashoggi, but only in the context of Khashoggi. And in the middle of a genocide. Nobody even cares. Yet the First Amendment is going on trial for doing First Amendment things. And the American media consensus is we hate Assange. Go ahead and get him.
Yeah, I mean,
it's stupid times, man. Stupid times.
Yeah, I mean, how ridiculous is it that you've had everybody to the left of Mitt Romney for the past 2 years saying that Trump is waging a war against journalists, and then his Department of Justice indicts Julian Assange for doing journalism, and nobody suddenly has anything to say.
Right.
I mean, condemn the, kind of right-wing, libertarian leaning Republicans too, who I read in Reason, like all declined to speak, Paul, Massey, Amash. Really, the only elected official I've seen say anything is Tulsi Gabbard. It's shocking.
Yeah, I mean, and for Rand Paul and for Thomas Massey and these guys to not stand up for them, I don't know, man. It's sick. I saw where Bernie Sanders refused to comment on it too. Look, I don't know what Massey's excuse is, but of course Bernie Sanders has a real shot at the presidency. He's the front runner on the Democratic side right now. And he's not trying to get into a war with the CIA and the FBI. If they want to put Julian Assange and Bradley Manning's head on spikes outside the gate, Bernie Sanders will look the other way. And the rest of these guys too. As you said, only Tulsi Gabbard stuck her neck out and said, no way, this is wrong. They're trying to, and the reason they're doing this is because they're trying to scare the rest of us that we better fall in line and shut up or else. Well, what the hell? This is America. That's not the way we do business here. Or is it? Or what is going on here?
All right. I guess we should move on and talk about, I want to ask about the collateral murder video. I'm sure everybody has seen it at this point, although I actually saw that National Bird documentary first. So when I watched the collateral murder video, I wasn't surprised at all by it. Unfortunately, I guess, I kind of thought that's what was going to happen and what was going to be. But at the time, Scott, did it have like a big impact on people? I know there's a lot of debate going on as far as the Afghan-Iraq wars at that time and drawing down or surging in Afghanistan. So did it have any impact on that debate and helping to, get U.S. troops or reduce presence anywhere?
Well, no, I'm not going to connect, I don't think, the collateral murder video itself to any real change in policy. It was, the huge breakout. WikiLeaks had been around for a little while, but this was what made WikiLeaks world famous. This is what put the fear of God into all the different states, especially the United States, about how far Assange was willing to go in publishing the truth about what they were doing. And so, like I was saying before about, blood on their hands and what have you, that this whole narrative that the real villains here are Assange and Manning. The media was so saturated with that stuff that it really did detract from the video. And after all, Kyle, support our troops, man. How are you going to sit here in your little air-conditioned place and criticize them when they're out there being brave heroes and all of this kind of thing? And so That played a huge part in it too. At the same time, I want to give people credit. Some people saw that and just thought that this is unbelievable and unconscionable. I mean, they told us we were going to save the Iraqi people. We were going there to help them, to give them freedom so they could be free like us, so that they wouldn't want to be terrorists anymore, even though they weren't. But anyway, and here we are, we're slaughtering them. So if you're not like a real foreign policy, wonk or, goofball like you or me, but you're just somebody's mom out there and you see this and you go, God dang, tearing people's lives apart with these high velocity rounds here, and seems like a problematic problem. I think it did shake people's consciences a bit. And what's interesting about that to me, so first of all, let me describe real quick. It's footage from an Apache helicopter, and they kill, I forget, 8 or 12 civilians on the ground, apparently confusing a Reuters cameraman's extended lens, zoom lens, for an RPG. It seems like that may have been a mistake, an honest mistake. They're like, oh, look, he's got something there, kind of thing. But then they just waxed this entire group of people. And it was a Reuters cameraman. It was not a weapon. And then a minivan pulls up. And it's a father who's in the middle of taking his children to school. And he sees these people slaughtered on the road. And he pulls over to go and help them and see if he can help evacuate any of the wounded. And then the Apache shoots up his car. And I think the little girl survived, but took one in the torso. I mean, was severely disfigured for life by this thing. Maybe she was killed. Anyway, it's a horror movie. It's absolutely horrifying. And the whole time, of course, the soldiers, the pilots in the helicopter are whooping it up and having the time of their lives, mocking the people as they're dying, blaming this guy. That's what you get for bringing your children to a battle. But it wasn't a battle. It was a massacre. Yeah,
it was. I was watching CNN, way back, I guess, did an interview with Jack Keane about this, saying that, the journalist shouldn't have had like that kind of camera out in the field, and, that made himself a target. And, watching that, he was really saying that, this is just kind of one of the things that happens in war. Like, this is it. Nothing needs to be changed or altered in any way. It happened. It's a feature of war. Nobody did anything wrong.
Patrick Coburn's new piece says, you know what, man? And Patrick Coburn knows from the Iraq war, okay? And he goes, look, guys with RPGs, they don't stand around on street corners under the watchful eye of an American Apache helicopter. The only reason those men were on that corner standing there like that was because they assumed that they were safe from that helicopter, because they weren't, quote unquote, guilty of being resistance fighters. And so the pilots right there should have known. It's not like they were far way over the horizon or whatever. They're within machine gun range. The people clearly, or at least would have had every reason to know, it didn't like Blue Thunder's whisper mode or whatever. The goddamn Apache helicopter. They know it's there. They're not hiding from it because they're not doing anything that they would assume would get them shot. And that's the kind of thing that the pilots immediately should have said, wait a minute now. They sure seem pretty confident right here within the gun range of us in this armored monster, But they weren't curious about that. They just had the opportunity to take the shot. And, of course, Jack Keane he was one of the major forces responsible for pushing for that surge and for that campaign during 2007. So, of course, whatever interview you saw, they didn't say, well, you're the one who sent this helicopter into this battle, essentially, aren't you, General? From out of power now, but just advising fatneck Fred Kagan on what's supposed to be going on over there. They didn't ask him that. They didn't ask him his conflict of interest in saying that it's the fault of the victim there. But he was the force with Petraeus and with the Kagans who pushed for that escalation in defiance of the Baker Commission's report and recommendation to get out of the country by 2008. And so, anyway, Robert Gates, who at that time was the Secretary of Defense, said, oh, yeah, well, you know what, though? Here's the thing about that, man. That might look pretty ugly, but you're just looking at war through a soda straw. And so, in other words, you don't understand the real context. And I think part of it was there had been some men under fire in that neighborhood earlier. Huh? They weren't under fire from these men. So what does that have to do with it? You could say that they were a little bit amped up looking for some bad guys. That's a little bit broader context. Okay. But let's go ahead and zoom out a little bit further. Look at the neighborhood where these men were slaughtered. They were in East Baghdad. They were essentially, right near the border area of Sadr City. They were fighting against Shiite militia fighters, not against the Sunni-based insurgency. Zoom out a little further. The whole war was for the Shiites against the Sunni-based insurgency. That was the war. From 2003, especially 2005, through 2008, America was on the side of the United Iraqi Alliance, Dawa, the Supreme Islamic Council, and Muqtada al-Sadr's group, the Mahdi Army. Those are the three legs on the stool of Shiite power in Iraq War II that America was allied with against their enemies, the Sunni tribal leaders, the former Ba'athist military commanders, and the Zarqawiyite al-Qaeda suicide bomber freaks. Okay? Those are the battle lines. So now, why was America fighting the Shiites in East Baghdad? Why were they fighting against Muqtada al-Sadr's men when the whole war was fought for Muqtada al-Sadr? Don't believe me? Look who's the kingmaker in Iraqi Shiistan, including Baghdad, the capital city, right now. Any member of the Dawa party who's been the prime minister there has been that with his assent and consent this whole time. Maliki couldn't remain the leader of the prime minister of the country unless under Sadr's dictate he kicked the Americans out. That was the condition. This is the alliance that America fought for. So Robert Gates wants to talk about soda straws. You zoom out on the context, it makes the entire slaughter of those innocent people that much more criminal. Because what kind of stupid policy is this? Going to war against the one part of our favorite faction that we like the least. Those people were killed for absolutely nothing. And and we're going to have to do more work about this, Kyle. There was a whole narrative in 2007 and 8. It was debunked a million ways from Sunday, of course, by the great Gareth Porter and Phil Giraldi and many others about the EFP bombs. And essentially every time a bomb went off, a roadside bomb went off that was set by a Shia and killed an American, it was said to be an Iranian EFP. Now, here's the deal. They never proved, not once, not ever, that a single one of these EFP bombs came from Iran. Now, the difference between an EFP and a regular IED is that these EFPs, they're explosively formed penetrators. That means they have a copper core and it's a shaped charge. And when it explodes, that copper gets superheated and it'll cut right through your armor. So it made them much more deadly. But there's this ridiculous sleight of hand that would fit a first grader perfectly, right? 1, 2, skip a few, and now we go to my conclusion. And so in this case, they go, well, if a Shiite sets a bomb, I say it must have come from Iran. I don't have to prove it. I say so because I'm an American government employee and that's my claim. And therefore, anytime an Iraqi Shia sets one of these Iranian bombs, that is the same thing as Iran set the bomb. And now to hear Pompeo say it, he doesn't even bother with the 1, 2, skip a few. He's already at the end of 99-100 here. The Iranians killed 600 Americans in Iraq War II, which is just false. You can't show me that one Iranian killed one American in Iraq War II. Now, if it was true that they were pouring these bombs into Iraq to be used against the Americans, you would have an argument on those facts if you would talk about those facts in context, that's whatever level of problem you want to call it. However, it was never shown at all that those bombs came from Iran, and it was shown over and over and over and over again that they were made in Iraq by Iraqis. Including Patrick Coburn was like with a group of soldiers in the fall of 2006 when they broke into a machine shop, and here's where they make the EFPs. That was, in fact, the first time I think I finally took notice. I was like, oh, this Patrick Coburn, this must be Alex Coburn's brother. I better get my head together and start reading this guy more. It was right then. And I wrote about this over and over and over again.
I know that's a little bit of an abrupt ending on today's show. I hadn't really planned to split it into 2 episodes, but like I said, it's quite the long interview, so that's her first half. I really hope you guys enjoyed it.